keep swinging the axe and keep chopping wood, if you will, and eventually the tree will fall and you'll be back, day after day after day, and stick to the process and keep practicing and keep grinding, and eventually, if you keep swinging the axe, the tree's going to fall.
Hey there, welcome to IndyStar.com. I'm Stephen Holder here with Zach Keefer, and we are back for another edition, the latest installment of Chopping Wood. We've been chopping a lot of wood. Colts have been chopping a lot of wood. It's training camp, as you know. We're into our second week. I don't know what day it is today. Zach, you can help me with this if you know. But that's just kind of how it is. I literally asked my wife, by the way, last night, what day is today?
I know the Lions are coming later in the week, but where we're at right now, it'd take me a second.
Yeah. And she looked at me like, you're joking, right? And I wasn't joking. But anyhow, it is Tuesday afternoon, I think. And the Colts wrapped up another practice this morning, had a day off on Monday. So we're doing what we do every sort of Tuesday, so far at least, and kind of update you on what's going on. And there's been a lot of little things, obviously, not huge stories, but a lot of little things. And I think we should probably start from big to small, clearly, and we'll run down a lot of things. We'll start with Andrew Luck. That's what you want to know about. We'll tell you what we can. We'll stick with the quarterback situation there, who's behind Andrew Luck, and the good and bad and the ugly. There's a lot of ugly. Hint, hint. We'll talk about some surprises, guys who are standing out, some guys who maybe need to do more, and then we'll sort of turn our attention to Sunday's game as well as we get further along into this. So back to the top. Let's start with number 12. He's the only guy that really matters around here. He's the guy that matters most for sure. Zach, what is your level of concern on Andrew Luck as we sit here, 4 weeks before the regular season opener?
This is more or less the same question I got at the grocery store the other night with the checkout lady.
That's too good.
Do you know anything about Andrew Luck's shoulder? I know we saw him recently. We saw him Saturday night and Sunday. Saturday is at Warren Central. He went through a rehab session, and don't read too much into it, but it was the first time we've seen him do something on a football field besides watch since he had surgery in January. I think personally it was just because of the time of day. Mm-hmm. So if they practice in the morning, he's doing rehab, so he's not out here. But if they practice in the afternoon or the evening, he's out there watching. It probably means absolutely nothing. My level of concern is not that high. Call me crazy. But I keep going back to the facts. The facts are the timetable puts him back in time for the game. They did not go out and sign a starting quarterback or a backup quarterback to start in that event in March or April. And they're rolling with Scott Tolzien right now. And I think the expectation in the organization is the hope is that he will get the strength back in that right arm and be able to play. And if he's not ready, he'll play for week 2. So it's not like a 6-week, 7-week, 10-week thing.
Right.
We'll see, though, because, we say that now. We say 4 weeks, 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden you're like, they're playing the Bengals on Thursday in the 4th preseason game, and they have a game the following weekend. So we'll see how it goes. Where are you at?
Well, to continue with that same thought with you talking about the final preseason game and that quick turnaround. So one of the questions that Chuck Pagano was asked today was how quickly could Andrew Luck get in the lineup and play?
Totally dismissed it.
Yeah, and this is not the first time now. Okay, Chris Ballard has kind of hinted at that before too, which is to say, you know what, we'd get him out there and we could get him ready to play pretty quickly. So they really don't see it or sort of view it as a situation where Andrew Luck needs to be out here for 2 or 3 weeks.
He's played a lot of football. He's played a lot of football.
That was a direct quote.
But that doesn't mean he's going to be sharp.
Now, that goes back to my reasoning for saying that Andrew Luck is probably not going to be your fantasy choice, in week 1 if he does play. That would probably not be smart. So I'd put him on the bench.
If you're the Indianapolis Colts and if he's cleared and he's 100% healthy, Andrew Luck at 75% of what he usually is still better than Scott Tolzien at 100%. Based on what we've seen lately, that's definitely better.
Which is a great segue because, man, oh man, Scott Tolzien. Okay, here's the problem with Scott Tolzien. And we've seen pretty much every throw he's made, right? And it's him, by the way. Let me just be clear. The whole Stephen Morris adventure, okay, and the wishful thinking about Stephen Morris, who I actually really like, and I thought that last year he really showed some athleticism and he's really intriguing, right? It has not translated on the practice field. We have not seen it, and he is not getting the first-team reps whatsoever.
We've seen more of Philip Walker. Obviously, Philip
the last
Walker
day.
is with the third team, and I mean, I haven't seen much of Stephen Morris at all. It is absolutely Scott Tolzien's show right now.
And when you have seen Stephen Morris, you haven't seen him throw the ball very accurately. So it's going to be Scott Tolzien. I mean, Chuck Pagano said that today. But
Yeah.
here's the thing. Scott Tolzien's got his own problems, okay? Okay, because the ball is just on the ground too often. And it's not that he's being woefully inaccurate per se. I think his problem is with timing. He doesn't really have the touch and the timing that Andrew Luck has. I mean, you and I talk about this all the time, sitting there in the press box watching games, right? And Luck will make a throw that is seemingly routine. And it's just such a thing of beauty because the ball is exactly where it needs to be, and it's just over the arm of an outstretched arm
That's
of a
what the
defender.
best quarterbacks do.
Exactly. They make it look easy, but you don't
It's
notice.
not easy.
You don't notice until they're not there. And I'm just telling you, they have a lot of work to do. Scott Tolzien has a lot of work to do. He's just not there right now.
Here's my question. So a couple years ago, Matt Hasselbeck was pretty bad in the preseason, to his own admission, in the games. And then when the lights came on and they needed him in a pinch, he played well. Now, that's a totally different situation. He's played X amount of years. Last year, Scott Tolzien was really rough in the preseason. And then he brought it when they needed him against the Steelers. I thought Tolzien played pretty well. Shrunken playbook, I get it. But he made the throws he needed to make to give them a chance to be competitive. They couldn't finish in the red zone. Does that sort of weigh on you a little bit in terms of maybe this is just part of the process and he's sort of a big game guy that can step it up? Maybe?
It's a fair point.
We've seen it happen before.
We did have this conversation last year. In fact, we probably spent too much time talking about the backup quarterbacks last year. And I did wonder, man, we're coming off a year last year now. A year ago at this time, we were coming off a year in which Andrew Luck had missed, 9 games?
9 games.
So it was a very relevant question. And it certainly, Scott Tolzien's performance in the preseason last year did not inspire a lot of confidence.
It begged the question, should Stephen Morris jump to the number? We had this discussion at one point with Chuck Pagano.
And a lot of fans thought
Right.
Stephen Morris should have got more of an opportunity to maybe take that job. But I think the Colts made the right call, but I do agree that there was an actual decision to be made last year.
Right.
So I think that's a fair point, and I don't want to sell him short, Scott Tolzien. I think he did do enough to help them win that Steelers game last year. I think the other guys around him, it's them who didn't do their part.
Right. And you remember Vontae Davis was playing hurt and he was getting torched by Antonio Brown. And
Ooh, that was ugly.
I mean, that puts a lot of pressure on your
Sure.
backup quarterback to come in and keep pace with that offense.
See, Andrew Luck can win games. The goal for Scott Tolzien was just don't screw it up. And really that is dependent upon others bringing their game up, and they didn't do that. So fair point. And that's why I'm really interested to see him play in these preseason games. Now, he wasn't good in the preseason last year either, but at least it's a better depiction.
Hey, this year he's playing with T.Y. Hilton, I mean, for a series or 2 or 3. Jack Doyle's going to be out there, and he'll have the number one offensive line, so he's not throwing to, the 7th and 8th receivers.
The other thing about Scott Tolzien last year in the preseason, I think we tend to forget, he started really rough, I thought, in that first preseason game. I think was that, Buffalo, if I recall.
Yeah, Andrew did not play that week.
Right. So he started off really rough in that game, but if you recall, and if you give him a fair shake, he got better over the course of the next 2 or 3 games. So it's not as if he was just sort of god-awful ugly every single week. He did progressively get better through the preseason to the point where by the time they were done, I felt like, all right, I think he'd done enough,
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, look, practice is practice, and it's not the same. So
it wasn't
I'll give him a shot.
uncommon to have Andrew Luck have a bad day last year, and but he would always bounce back and have a 5-touchdown day where he just lit up the defense. We're just not seeing that, and that's understandable because they're 2 totally different quarterbacks. But thus far, Scott Tolzien has not given you a lot of hope at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and the other thing about Tolzien that hurts them is some of those throws that Andrew Luck's really good at, which then become a staple of your offense, his game, those are not a strengths of Scott Tolzien's game. So I'm talking about sort of those deep outs, throws like that where you're throwing across the field in some cases. Andrew just has such a touch for those passes.
Yeah.
I think his deep balls, frankly, are sometimes his most accurate, which makes no sense.
It's how him and Ty made their money in this league. I mean,
Yes.
they just from the get-go they were doing that in 2012.
I mean, how many 3rd and 8s have they completed, with Ty breaking back toward the sideline,
Right.
25 yards down the field? I mean, it's a bread and butter play for them. Well, Scott Tolzien, you're not going to get that same kind of accuracy
You're
and
going
touch.
to get Jack Doyle over the middle or inside slants, things like that. You know, it's just
It makes you a little more predictable, I think, as an offense. So the coach is not going to put him in position to make that sort of Andrew Luck-like throw. So if you're the defensive coordinator, you're going to play the percentages. So it'll be interesting. And I think there are some limitations to his game. And if he has to play in the regular season, Scott Tolzien, the defense is going to have an advantage in knowing those things. So that is something we'll just have to keep watching. But as to the Stephen Morris story, there is no Stephen Morris story right now. So let's see what he does on, Sunday. Again, I told you I didn't know what day it was. So let's talk about some other guys. There are plenty of non-quarterbacks on this team, Zach, and I think we should probably touch on some guys who maybe have had a really strong camp, but maybe not expectedly. Who for you has been a surprise in this camp in a positive fashion?
Yeah, there's a lot of guys standing out so far, and it's obviously a little skewed, right? Because you're going to veer towards the skill positions, right? Because they're the guys, it's hard to really tell a lineman standing out. But Buck Howard, man, the last week he's been everywhere, including being thrown out of practice on Friday. He said the block just went too far, but look, I talked to Buck Howard after today's practice, and he's got a strong head on his shoulders. He knows the way he's going to make this team is through the special teams route. He knows the depth at receiver is there. But I don't think anybody has caught more balls over the last week as Buck Howard. And look, he's got an opportunity right now. Philip Dorsett has missed 2 days practice. Dante Moncrief has been out for 4 days. T.Y. Hilton is doing his thing, and that's a guy you never worry about. But Buck Howard has an opportunity, and he's taking advantage of it. And he's making a bunch of catches, and he's proven to be very consistent. Another guy that's doing the same thing is Chester Rogers. But, let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's August 7th or 8th or whatever day it is. But this is a guy that's
we have no idea.
He's going to get the ball thrown to him in preseason games. Now, if he handles that well, I could see him getting a chance down the line to compete for one of those last receiver spots. I mean, he's just been so solid the last week.
Yeah, I think the thing about Buck Howard that's interesting to me is this guy has the physical tools that pretty much no one else has in that lineup.
He's big.
Yeah.
He's big.
He really is. I mean, I think today was the first time I'd actually talked to him in person, and he is really imposing, man. I was impressed. I'm like, man. And what I asked him was, a lot of guys are big guys but don't know how to use their size. I asked him, how does he, sort of deliberately use his size? And one of the things he said was, he really does try to assert himself with his size.
You can tell.
Yes.
You can tell.
And that is the difference between just being a guy with measurables and a guy who actually takes advantage of that.
I mean, who's made more plays so far? Kamar
really
Aiken
good.
or Buck Howard?
He's been really good.
You have to say Buck Howard.
Yeah,
based
I
on
would.
strictly what we've seen. And Kamar Aiken had a nice day Saturday night at Warren Central, but I would definitely say Buck Howard has at least caught our eye.
Right, and he's clearly not going up against first-team defenders, obviously, because he's a sort of a third-team guy right now. But I'm telling you, that's how Chester Rogers started last year.
That's how it starts.
That's how it started, and I've always felt like there are some glimpses that you get in training camp that come November you flash back to that and you're like, you know what? Now that I think about it, that guy was balling in training camp.
Right.
It happens all the time. Not all the time, but it does happen from time to time. And we had that conversation, or have had that conversation, about Chester Rogers. And Buck Howard's not there yet. He's got so far to go, right? He's got to get on the freaking second team, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, so let's keep this in perspective. But he's different. And Chris Ballard has made it very clear. He's looking for guys who have something that distinguishes them. And Buck Howard has that in his size, and he's utilizing it to his advantage. Along the same lines, I think it's interesting to look at the other side of the spectrum. So we talk about who's our surprise, but who needs to pick it up? Who's out there with a lot to prove and isn't cutting it right now? I have a couple guys in mind. I don't know who you have in mind.
Who jumps right away? Who jumps out to you besides the quarterback right now?
Well, it's one TJ Green for me. Have you seen TJ Green? Make a play?
I haven't, and he's been exclusively with the 2s and 3s at the safety position so far.
And as we stand right now, TJ Green is going to have to be a monster special teamer. That's like his value.
There's no other way to cut it.
Yeah, because frankly, right now, your first round pick is starting to come along. Okay, he's getting some first team snaps.
Malik Hooker is starting as of today. I saw him out there with the first team more and more, and you're seeing them ramp him up. I think they're playing this perfectly with him. Not to get too far off topic, but slowly but surely get him acclimated, give him some first team reps. You're seeing the ball skills, you're seeing the instincts. With TJ Green, you're not seeing a whole lot. I don't think he's in danger of being cut. It's too far down the line. We have games to play.
Yeah, I agree.
And they need depth at that position, obviously. But yeah, you're not seeing anything.
Yeah, and so today my one sort of memory of TJ Green in practice today was he actually had to break off and go in the slot and line up against Jack Doyle. And Jack gave him a move to the outside and took him inside on a square in route and Tolzien hit him in stride, for a first down. And it wasn't a huge play.
First downs are rare these days.
So that's why I'm sitting here recalling it 4 hours later. But, look, it wasn't necessarily the play of the day or anything, but that's what you got to do. I mean, you got to be able to make a play there and impose your will on a guy. And Jack Doyle is a good player, right? So there's no shame in this per se. But that's the role of that strong safety. You're going to have to come down and do that. And a guy who has, we just talked about measurables with Bug Howard, okay? Here's a guy who's 6'3", has all kinds of length, all kinds of speed. When does he use that as an attribute? When does he use those attributes to his advantage? And I'm not seeing him do that. So that, for me, has been a little disappointing in TJ Green. As you said, I don't think he's a guy in danger of getting cut. There's just such a dearth of depth at that position. But you got to do something. I mean, he's not done anything to give them any reason to look at their depth chart.
Making some plays on Sunday would not be a bad thing for TJ Green. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. And by the way, a little public service announcement. Speaking of depth chart, we should get one here pretty soon.
I was going to say any day now, right? We should, and it'll be what we've seen, I believe. I think it'll be exactly what I think they've got an idea of what their 22-man starter looks like, but that's going to change.
Yeah, I saw somewhere. I think it was might have been Jacksonville. I can't remember, but maybe it was Fournette. There was a rookie running back. Oh, I know what it was. It was in Minnesota. Dalvin Cook apparently came out on the first depth chart and was their number one running back. Now, I don't think the Colts are going to play it that way. I think you're going to see the rookies as second, third teamers.
Yeah.
You're not going to see any shockers that way, and that's intentional. So, but there are occasionally some surprises on that thing. You remember last year, or 2 years ago, Bjorn Werner in training camp. They came out with the first depth chart, and they had him as like the second team strong side linebacker after saying he was a rush linebacker forever.
Yeah, well, they came to the realization that it ain't happening.
It was kind of an admission. So sometimes the depth chart can kind of tell you, okay, so I'm not crazy, and that can happen sometimes. So we'll keep an eye on that and see what they do there. Sunday's game, it's going to be interesting. I mean, oftentimes we get more excited about these preseason games than we probably should, just because
it's a change of pace. It's a change of pace for us, and it's fun for about half quarter.
Well, like 20 minutes.
Right.
But that being said, I think there's a couple things that really need to get clarified for this team, and that we should be really looking for. And for me, one of them is just the defense. I mean, who is this team? Who is this team defensively? Like, what are they? Who are they?
Yeah, and we won't know that until September, October, November, etc. But there's going to have 8, 9 different starters just on this Sunday. I mean, we've got a couple guys. I don't think we'll see Jonathan Hankins. He was out again today with that ankle, but it's not serious, Chuck Pagano said. But as an aside, speaking of the defense, I'm really starting to get curious about Kendall Langford's situation because I'm not entirely convinced he's going to get back.
I think our instincts have taught us, or lessons, we've learned lessons over the years, right? To never assume anything.
Right.
And I think Chris Ballard has said they had the intention of him coming back before the regular season. But, I mean, like, I have intentions of, buying a Maserati.
Right.
Right? Like, it's probably not going to happen. Not right now.
From the little bit that I've heard, it's going to be close.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there's 100. I mean, I can't say right now there's 100% chance he's back on this team. And
I'm
for
not.
a guy that's been, in the league, 10 years, sometimes that's how it ends. You just can't get over an injury. Obviously, if he's back, if he can get back, he's a great addition to that defensive line. But as of right now, I'm not sure that happens. So you have to probably move forward with the understanding you're not going to be with Kendall Langford possibly, because I haven't seen any indication that he's getting closer to coming back, and I don't think there's any guarantee that he is coming back.
And so here's another little item on defense that I think you should kind of keep an eye open for, and it's the nickelback situation. I mean, look, they've got Darius Butler in the secondary right now.
Nickelback.
At safety.
I thought terrible music when you said Nickelback.
Hey, you know what?
Awful.
That shows you where your head's at. It's not in training camp.
No,
I understand.
That's a good point.
Which I understand.
I don't know who
Well, I can tell you who it is right now. I mean, I'm not saying this is going to inspire confidence, but I'll tell you who it is. It's Daryl Morris is the nickelback.
It is.
And listen, that's a big drop-off, I feel like, from Darius Butler to Daryl Morris. And as Chuck Pagano told me today, they play nickel defense like 65% of the time.
Their best nickel corner is playing safety right now. I mean, that's what it is.
And, like, no, not like as a luxury. Like, they need him.
Yeah, they need him at safety, but they also need him at nickel corner.
Right.
And you'd like to see Nate Hairston maybe, but that's a lot to ask a fifth-round pick out of. And
Chuck Pagano said today that he's really happy with Hairston and he's making a lot of plays out here. I don't agree, actually. I was kind of like, Chuck, I don't see it. I think Hairston has a long way to go, personally.
I've seen more from Wilson than I have from Hairston, but that's probably to be expected.
Oh, sure. But I think Morris is far ahead of Hairston, at that nickel corner spot right now. But that is a position that I think is a weakness of this defense right now. And it's going to hurt them.
It will.
It could hurt them.
I guarantee you it will. So will inside linebacker. How's we had John Bostic out today, but him and Antonio Morrison have been running with the ones just about every day since we started.
Yeah.
Antonio Morrison gives me pause at the
He
inside
should.
linebacker spot. Because it sounds like they want him to be a starter. They want him to become that, and I'm just not there yet.
You're not taking the hard sell, huh?
But hey, I don't have a better option. I don't necessarily have, a plan B. I just think he's going to struggle again. We'll see.
Well, one thing that Ted Monachino, the defensive coordinator, did admit last week is that the separation there at inside linebacker is razor thin. So that is an acknowledgement that no one's locked up anything. Now, they really do like Bostic, but listen, alarm bells go off for me when I see him miss practice. So we'll get more details as the week goes on him.
A guy's name we haven't mentioned at all is Sean Spence.
Not at all. Sean Spence, right now, is like, sort of a key special teamer.
Yeah, 2 and 3s right now at best. You
Yeah.
know?
That's so it was surprising at first for me, but in retrospect, the more that I've thought about it, it does make some sense for me, and it's because two things. Number one, they gave him sort of a prove it deal, 1-year deal.
Right.
They weren't investing a lot in him. Number one. Number two, they wanted to get bigger on defense. Well, he's the smallest linebacker they have.
Right.
So he had to overcome that, and I think Monachino really sort of gravitates toward those bigger, more physical guys too. So Sean Spence is not that. He can run, certainly, but he's undersized and he doesn't really fit what Monachino ideally wants in that regard. So we'll see. It's just the little flavor of what's going on defensively. I think that will continue on Sunday and beyond, but the coaches, I think defensively, they really want to see where they're at. Offensively, when they get Luck back, they feel like they know who they are.
Yeah.
And they should.
I think they're comfortable with that. And,
yeah.
I mean, even just like a brief chat with Rob Chudzinski after practice, he said the 2 practices this week with the Lions are more valuable than the game. Because the game, I mean, who knows how long they're going to play the starters.
Yeah.
And
it's all vanilla.
And you're gonna bring out the playbook this week. And you haven't really gotten all of it out there yet, but you're gonna try some stuff. So these 2 padded practices with the Detroit Lions Thursday and Friday, will be instrumental in this offense, sort of getting it out there and getting some more reps together. And we'll see how Scott Tolzien looks then against a real defense. I'm not optimistic. And we'll see how he looks Sunday in a game.
Well, let's talk about this particular aspect. I'm going to give Pagano a little credit here. Listen, we certainly take every shot we can at Chuck, and we do it lovingly. But I'm going to give him some credit. I think this camp has been legitimately physical.
I'm buying it. I'm with you on that.
And I did question this, I think, last week, right, on this podcast. I think we had this conversation, and that's when he and I had that long exchange, remember? And I was like, Chuck, I don't know. And he took great offense. Well, they have ramped it up. They actually had live tackling today. Right?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that?
Yeah. No, not this year. And
not any year for me.
Not very often in years past.
Yeah.
And look, I understand that they are limited in certain ways by the CBA. I don't know the details of that, but I know you can't hit right away. Mm-hmm. But I'm with you. I'm completely buying into them being more physical. The only non-padded practices they've had in the last week since they were allowed to go to pads was Sunday and I think Friday. Mm-hmm. And then you had in between, you had Saturday night where they were as physical as they've been. And then today they ramped it up even more. You heard pads popping. You heard guys getting after it, guys getting down to the ground. So maybe they are preaching what Chris Ballard has stressed for so long. They want to have a more physical camp because they want to have a team that doesn't break down in November and December.
And I think it's interesting. The players, I think, are really embracing it too. I talked to Anthony Costanzo about this today, and Anthony said, you know what, I don't want my first live football to be in the preseason game.
Right.
He said, I think you need to have some live tackling before you get to that game. And he said, it's not just for the defense, because I think that's what we forget, is that it's not just about the defense and tackling. On offense, he said, you know what, they never really finish their blocks in camp, in practice.
Huge.
You don't finish it because you can't finish it. You can't take that defensive lineman and drive him into the ground, right? You don't do that when you're not going live. But when you do go live, you can do that. And he says, you know what, you forget that you have to play to the whistle, and you can do that when when you have that live tackling. So kudos to them. I think it's important, and I think it's worth the risk. I honestly do.
I go back to 2015 when they had that offensive line all figured out. They moved Jack Mewhort over to right tackle. They had Todd Harriman's in there, and they talked up that offensive line the entire duration of camp. They figured it out. These are our guys. They didn't do any live stuff, and they went into the games. It was okay. They got them out of there. Then they went to the real games, and it was a disaster. And they pulled Harriman's 2 games into his Colts career. He was gone by the end of the season. They moved Jack Mewhort back over. So what I'm saying is exactly that. It can be very deceiving until you actually play real football.
And look, I know this is going to sound crazy, but it was only 8 snaps today of live tackling.
And you counted?
Well, actually, Pagano did. He said 3 with the first team, 3 with the second.
It was a very brief period.
And 2 with the third team. So I know it sounds ridiculous that we're doing a whole segment here on 8 plays, but it's more about a tone, I think, that was set there. And Antonio Morrison and Raven Clark apparently had a dust up. We couldn't see behind the crowd there of players, but he had to sort of set those 2 guys straight. And you don't necessarily want that to happen in the game, and I understand that, but I want to see some fire. I mean, if I'm a coach, I want to see my guys get mad as hell and want to tear into somebody else. I want to see that.
The practices with the Lions will be very interesting because you're going to see guys that, hey, he's not on my team. I don't care about him.
Right.
We'll see a little bit more of that, and I know Chuck's going to stress the no fighting thing, but we're going to have a couple. Let's be honest.
I think there will be, and because guys know it's not a game, they can't get ejected, fined, and all that. So I think you're going to have some guys probably take it a little too far. But you know what? Hey, we'll take it because we don't have a lot to work with some days, so we'll take it. But I will say they have been more physical, and the other thing I would say is I think in the past, one of the things that has dissuaded Pagano from being a little more physical was the age of his football team. This is a younger team this year.
Absolutely.
This is a younger team.
You had those guys sitting out every third day.
Well, right. That is another thing we have not seen. Have you seen guys getting rest days? I can't even tell. Jack Mewhort's the only guy
and that
I
was
can
strange,
think of.
Yeah.
And that's fine. He's coming off an injury. I get that. I don't have a problem with it. But like, who's gotten a rest day?
Yeah, I mean,
if they weren't hurt.
I keep going back to 2015. That's one of the more bizarre seasons I think I'll ever cover. But like day 3 of camp, Andre Johnson had a day off, and I'm like, day 3, like,
right?
Like I get it. He's earned it. He's got 1 million yards receiving, and he's proven it for a decade. But
you're not going to be sharp if you're on the sideline. I mean,
right.
At the end of the day, you got to practice.
They have that luxury right now of throwing everybody in there every single day.
You're right. Jabal Shear's not taking a day off, right? John
No.
Simon, he's not taking days off. John Hankins now has the ankle, but he didn't take any days off. They have, I'm telling you, they have been
It's
more
a new way of
dedicated.
doing things.
Yeah, they've been more dedicated to I think making practice more of a simulation of the game than I've ever seen them. And I don't know if this is the Chris Ballard effect, maybe, because if you're Chuck Pagano, wouldn't it be smart to look, even though we know this goes against some of what he believes in, but isn't it smart if you're Chuck Pagano to be sensitive to what your GM stresses and the things that he believes in?
And not only that, what you've done in the past, for the most part, has not worked.
Bingo.
The last 2 years. Do something different.
Bingo.
And if it doesn't work, then you tried it both ways, and you're doing what your GM wants. But your defense needs to be different, and it needs to start right now. So you need to try different things.
Yeah, no question about it. So I definitely think there's something to that. And, hey, I don't think there's a downside to it. I mean, certainly injuries are a downside, right? But for the most part, outside of that, I think you got to do it. It's worth the risk in small doses, which is what they did today. So, see, Chuck, it's not all bad all the time. I can give credit where due, because we know you listen. And let's sort of wind this down. We talked about sort of camp surprises, but let's talk about one guy, I think, or at least maybe even a couple guys, if you have one, to watch in the preseason. I think there's going to be some interesting guys there are always guys who sort of pop up and sort of flash out of nowhere. And then we end up writing stories about guys people have never heard of,
Right.
And one guy who I've seen flash a little bit and who I think is going to slowly but surely make some plays is Grover Stewart. I mean, you talk about a grown man.
He is a big kid.
He's like 330 pounds, I want to say.
I would not want to block him.
Yeah, he's every bit of like 6'4" and 330. But he's not just a big guy, though. That's the thing. Like, he can actually get off the football. And I was talking to Rick Venturi about him today. And Rick Venturi knows a little more about football than I do. Former NFL coach, obviously. And Rick said, you know what? That guy is going to be a player. And he felt like the combination of size and speed is really rare. And I've always felt like if you pick a guy like that out of a Division II school in the 4th round, you have to be so sold on that guy.
Yeah.
And I think they are. I'm just telling you, I'm really looking forward to watching that guy. And he's going to make a play or two that people are going to say, huh, wow. What about a guy? Well, maybe you've got a guy.
That's a good one. I keep going back to the receiving race at receiver. I just keep thinking Philip Dorsett, Chester Rogers. You got Bug Howard playing well. Where's Kamar Aiken going to show up? That for me is still the most intriguing position race on offense. But on defense, I mean, I'm going to keep my eye on 29 and 31 as well. Quincy Wilson has seemed to make strides every week.
I would agree.
If I had to pick one of them right now to be in the starting lineup, it's hard. It's hard because I could see them both being in the starting lineup in week 1 of the regular season, but I could see neither of them being in the starting lineup in week 1. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But
this is why we need the games.
The secondary is definitely something to watch because you can see the ball skills. You can see how they're going to match up with NFL caliber receivers and that kind of stuff. That's going to be a true gauge. We're going to start to see that on Sunday.
And you mentioned one guy. I know I'm just jumping around here, but one guy you mentioned, Kamar Aiken. What's interesting about him is I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy who shows up under the lights as opposed to practice because he's a physical guy. That's his game, and that tends to sort of come out more so in actual regulation. So we'll see.
And we see that every year. We see someone step up in the preseason games that we didn't see in training camp necessarily. So.
And we see the opposite.
Correct.
Guys who show up in practice and shrink in the games.
Why you got to diss Deron Carter like that?
Cough, Deron Carter. Yeah, you beat me to it. I mean, have you? By the way, I know I'm jumping around again, but that is probably the biggest disparity between practice and games I've ever seen from
It's-
any player in my entire career.
It's a great lesson for us.
It is.
Don't believe everything you see at camp. I mean, he was going against the ones too, and
He was
still
killing them.
And I mean, I saw with my own eyes, and I remember
Like,
that
I was there.
the
Okay.
preseason game in Philadelphia. I think he fumbled the opening kickoff, and just it went downhill from there.
Deer in the headlights. So.
Yep.
So that's why the games are fun, because we really don't know who it's going to be until we actually see it. But there will be some guys who shrink, and there will be some guys who say, I can do this, and they step up and they do it. So who's it going to be? We'll find out. But that is pretty much what we got for this week. I think we covered a lot of ground. And look, I mean, if we're not hitting topics you want to talk about, you can always tweet us or email us too, by the way. So, I mean, let's be clear. We probably shouldn't admit this, but, I mean, we just make this stuff up 5 minutes before we pick the microphone up. Let's be honest. So it's really stream of consciousness. So I mean, we're out here watching it every day. We might as well just regurgitate what we see. So anyhow, that's it. Let's wind this down. I'm Stephen Holder here with Zach Keefer. We'll be back again next week like we always are. I'm sure we'll have much more to talk about because we'll have a game in the books. We'll have the practices with the Lions. And who knows, maybe we'll have some real updates on Andrew Luck, but not counting on it. So anyhow, thanks for listening. Come back and see us next week. Stay tuned to IndyStar.com. Lots of good stuff coming up this week, including your story today, Zach, on, tell me, what is
The
young man's
Olympic
name?
track star, Marvin Bracey.
Your newest Indianapolis Colt. So stay tuned for that and more. I'm Stephen Holder with Zach Kiefer, and this is Chopping Wood.